Just happy to see all you folks here. What I think, and we'll try and get the technology working, but we're going to have to go without for a moment. The first thing I would like to do is provide space for the two of you, if after speaking and after hearing each other, if you wanted to open up with a few comments.
Should I?
Yeah.
What I've learned from Professor Spivak, from the paper especially published in the Venuti Anthology, which is a very good anthology of readings, and being stimulated by that, I'm saying, well, something happens to the individual, and gender is an incredibly important part of that encoding and multiple recoding, but something's also happening between our ideological systems, and that's where I wanted to draw from your work, out from the notion of the individual using translation as a passage into culture, to our view of cultures as systems, ideological systems, if you like, that are, perhaps genetically, but I don't like those metaphors at all, are seeking to transform themselves through a process of translation. I would want to add other things that I sort of left out. I apologize for not using all the time. I rarely do that. In the blog debates that I've been engaged in, actually with good Catholics with Irish names in the United States about the Vatican policies, at one point a woman answered a paper I'd written, but he was talking about the foreign text. The foreigner says, no, Latin to English translation for the liturgy, there's no foreign text, this is our text. And that struck me, that it's not this one or the foreign and the home, auberge du lointain, as one would say. For her, it was translation within the one culture. And that has a lot to say. Also, these days, I'm living in California, speaking Spanish. My wife speaks Spanish everywhere she goes. You say, are you speaking a foreign language? Well, no, Spanish has been there for a lot longer than English. And you can see California developing now as a bilingual society. No matter what the official policy might be, just in practice, it's working that way. Translation is working within our communities, within our ideological systems. So I just wanted to add what I've learned from Professor Spivak's work and how I've tried to shape that to my own interests.
Thanks a lot, Anthony. Professor Pim, I suppose I should say, the egregious.
I've learned from Gayatri a lot.
Yes.
Oh, wait, specification. She's an alumnus of our university because she got an honorary doctorate in May this year.
And we both wore wonderful hats. You can find us on the web. And I told Professor Pim that I would wear that hat in the wintertime because, as I said there, no one is weird in New York. I would just wear it as a hat. Anyway, to go to more serious matters, I think what I really like about the work you do, and I hope to learn more, is the fact that you are working with Europe. You know, I'm a Europeanist as well, and the work that began, that unfortunately got labeled post-colonial, and then as I moved away, nobody looked at anything anymore. I just remained a post-colonial. The work that began was the suggestion that in order to be a good Europeanist, you have to take in all of these things, you know, colonial adventures, history, and you're in Spain, I mean, Arab Europe, and all of that stuff. I mean, and you, I think, for the first time have really, I mean, I have lots of friends in our Middle Eastern and South Asian, MISAS now, and African studies, who know this kind of stuff. But but what it really involves is translation, and I believe I hear something from you which is quite new, and effective and good. I will move forward with your work, I think, more, but there hasn't been that much time, because you are doing Europe. You have come now to see what they do in America, etc. You say that you're a little bit disingenuous, you know already what we do. That's then, you know, introducing one's paper talk. And I'm sorry I didn't use that. Everybody here knows I talk too much. But it was because, you see, I've just come back from Poland and I'm not really very well, etc. I didn't check the invitation to see how long I had to speak, so I timed myself by how long you spoke, see? So that's why I also didn't choose. I think it's a good thing. Okay, so that for me is a very solid thing. But I would like to say something about this foreign language, and then I'll shut up because this is not a meeting. And here I'm totally not Venuti, that it's not a foreign language that you're translating, because you have, I mean, there's no theory in this way. But that's the real difference between, you know, from the late 18th century, the philosophy of translation began to change slowly. And it seems to me that Goethe doing Weltliteratur is very different from these early translations where it's not the translator, and as I said, Marx in his 18 Brumaire, and this is the last thing I'll say, Marx in his 18 Brumaire, when he talks about revolutionary practice, he gives the model of learning a foreign language so well that when you are producing in that language, you forget the language rooted in you. It's very badly translated in English. They actually lose the metaphor of rooted in you. Huh? So it seems to me that he's the end of that thing, end of that understanding, of looking at the language that you translate from as not necessarily a foreign language. So I would like to say that this is something that it's a very epistemological statement. How would you prove it? But it's something that you might consider in terms of the foreignness of what you translate from when you are a good translator. That's no longer the case. When you're doing third world literatures today, you hardly know the language you translate. Anyway, thank you.
Thanks to both of you. I have our first question with Professor Stefano Arduini.
One or two marginal notes for Anthony. Inculturation. This is interesting. You mentioned that inculturation is not only for church or for Christian religious tradition, but of course happen also in other systems. Okay, so maybe we can consider 3 moments in Western culture when inculturation happens. The first one is when the Latin tradition assume the Greek tradition inside. The second one is precisely the Christian tradition. At a certain moment, the Christian tradition transfer the classic tradition inside in its framework. But the third one is Renaissance. In Renaissance, the classical world is reframed inside a new culture which is beginning. And that is a very strong act of inculturation, because it cancels, for example, this strange Latin, for example, this Latin Creole, which came from Middle Age. So what is interesting is that this open, free, sunrising moment of Western culture, like Renaissance, is founded on an act of inculturation. So when we think to Renaissance, which is not the Renaissance shown by the Hollywood movies, that is Renaissance, and a strong act of inculturation coming from Latin culture, Greek culture, which cancelled all the Creole created by the different Romance cultures. This is what the first note. The second note is about I mean, okay, maybe it is true that there is a strong influence of the NIDA dynamic translation in Catholic Church. Surely there is a connection, but probably, I mean, it's not a direct influence. I mean, the Catholic Church found there something that had from the beginning. I mean, in the difference between dynamic and free and literal translation, you can find the 60s in the 60s debates. You simply find the debate inside the church from the church of the fathers of the church. For example, in the conflict between Augustine and Jerome. So it's a long history of 2,000 years, and simply there, at a certain point, they refound what was very traditional. And the fact that in a certain moment win one line or the other depends in what point of his history the church is. So, for example, it is true that in the 60s there is this an open possibilities for Catholic Church, and so, for example, this way of translation was considered interesting, but and now is different. But I think it's not it's simply a very recent story. It's a very long story, which maybe finds the last point with NIDA dynamic and literal translation.
Anthony, I'm going to ask you just to frame the short of how you want to respond to that, for the benefit of the videotaping, to articulate what you heard of the two questions, and then your response. So, sorry to give you that short, but.
Thank you, Professor Alpuini. I really take the model of enculturation and I'm exploring it. I'm not in any position, you're in a better position than I to portray European civilization as three moments of enculturation: Greek into Latin, Latin into Christian culture, and that into Renaissance humanism. If it works, please proceed. You know far more about that than I do. I'm simply exploring this notion. I must add that as I explore it, I'm quite prepared to accept situations where enculturation and translation as part of it is not a good thing. And I think in translation studies we've been so convinced, all of us, that translation by definition has to be a good thing, and interaction between cultures has to be a good thing. As far as I'm concerned, a lot of those moments, the building of European empires, has not been a good thing. And I'm quite prepared to look at the role of translation critically within that. So I would say yes, but, or yes, but let's take it to its consequences. The other point that's very useful for me, and you bring it up there, is that enculturation is a wider frame within which translation is a part. Certainly when I get the Renaissance humanist text coming to Spain, we do have translation into Spanish, but we have a lot of learning of Latin at the same time. And that language learning and translation go hand in hand as parts of enculturation. I'm very happy to have that wider frame, and I think this is something we can and should discuss. Whether or not we want to keep translation in that term of movement between texts in languages, in different languages, or do we want to make translation the superordinate? Say, enculturation is one form of translation. And that's a real debate, I think, for the disciplines we're involved in, post-colonial studies especially, comparative literature as well.